He thought firing me was the end of it. No drama, no shouting match, just a quiet goodbye. But 2 weeks later, in a global conference call, his biggest deal collapsed without warning. No one traced it back to me, and that's exactly how I planned it. Here's how a single, silent exit unraveled everything he built. The sound of his shoes was the first thing I noticed. Not his voice, not the confident handshake, not even his perfectly tailored navy suit, just the sound. Sharp, deliberate clicks echoing down the polished concrete hallway, like a metronome that didn't care who it unsettled. Brandon Cross, 35 perhaps, the new CEO of Langston & Rowe. He walked through the front doors that morning as if he'd already been running the place for years. Didn't pause to speak to the receptionist, didn't acknowledge the security guard who held the door. Just breezed through the lobby with a sleek briefcase and a look in his eyes that said, "I'm here to fix everything." Technically, it was his building now. I watched from my glass-walled office, tucked between the international accounts wing and legal. Not quite corner, not quite central, just enough off to the side that people tended to forget I could see everything, and I preferred it that way. 17 years, that's how long I'd been here. Long enough to survive 4 leadership changes, 2 mergers, and 1 restructuring that gutted our Tokyo branch. I didn't wear power heels or designer labels. I didn't fight for airtime in meetings, but I knew how this company breathed, what held it up, and what could bring it down. I kept things moving quietly, like a well-oiled machine behind a velvet curtain. So when Brandon stepped off the elevator and walked the executive floor with his chin slightly too high, taking mental inventory like he was shopping for parts, I felt it, that slight shift in the air, like pressure dropping before a storm. He didn't come to see me that day. Not that I expected him to. His kind rarely did. Young, fast-talking, all pivot and buzzwords. They didn't look for the quiet ones, not until the quiet ones were gone and everything started slipping. Still, I watched. Watched how the HR director, Camille, didn't meet anyone's eyes at lunch. Watched how the intern who used to hum under her breath now typed in silence. Watched how middle managers who used to stroll through the hallway with coffee cups now hugged the walls, moving like prey. Something was coming. And it wasn't just a change in leadership. It was a change in temperature, a deep, invisible frost that made everyone sit straighter, laugh less, speak in rehearsed tones. The kind of cold that doesn't kill right away. It waits. By 4:00 p.m., I had already heard whispers of efficiency audits and agility reviews, words dressed like opportunity but with sharp edges underneath. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring out at the skyline. I'd seen transitions before, but this one felt different. Colder, quieter, and far from over. The first thing to go was the laughter. It used to drift through the halls. Small things, someone sharing a silly joke near the copier, someone else venting after a client call in that half-whispered, half-laughing way we all did. It was background noise, easy to miss until it vanished. Now there was just stillness, and doors that used to stay open, like Camille's in HR and Jansen's from finance, were shut more often than not. The tap-tap of heels on tile sounded faster now, more urgent, as if everyone had somewhere better to be. Or maybe they just didn't want to be seen standing still. The word restructuring hadn't officially been spoken, but it didn't need to be. You could feel it in the air, tight, expectant, like holding your breath before bad news. Behind the conference room glass, Brandon Cross stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled just so, pointing at a screen none of us could see. I watched from my office across the atrium, pen in hand, though I wasn't writing. 3 closed-door meetings in 5 days. Always the same group. Brandon, legal, HR, and someone from strategy I didn't recognize. and always followed by an absence. First, it was Terrence, who'd run logistics for over a decade. His desk emptied overnight. No farewell email, no awkward cake in the break room, just a sudden vacancy where his nameplate used to be. Then Marianne from Global PR, gone before the morning meeting. In their place came new hires, young, polished, LinkedIn perfect. Their clothes fit too well. Their smiles were slightly too eager. They walked fast and talked faster. But when you asked them a question about legacy systems or old vendor contracts, they blinked, asked you to repeat yourself, took notes like they were learning a foreign language. They called it modernization. I called it hollow. From my seat near the window, I watched it all without a word. The swirl of activity, the shifting alliances, the reshuffling of desks and titles. No one asked for my input. That was fine. I didn't offer it. Instead, I took notes in my head, in the margins of unrelated meeting agendas, on yellow sticky notes that I tucked beneath my keyboard. Not facts exactly, but patterns, tones, glances exchanged between managers. The new stiffness in hallway conversations. The way the printer near HR jammed, and no one fixed it for 2 days because no one knew who was supposed to anymore. My pen moved almost absent-mindedly as I watched another unfamiliar face pass by the glass wall. Another replacement, another empty seat filled before it had time to cool. I didn't panic. That wasn't my nature. But there was a certainty building inside me, quiet but firm, like a low hum under the floorboards. This wasn't a rebrand. It was a teardown. And the people who kept the walls standing, people like Terrence, like Marianne, were being cleared out like old furniture. I stayed still, eyes open, because the storm hadn't broken yet. But it would. The all-hands meeting was called for 9 o'clock a.m. sharp, mandatory. The email had said, "A new era of efficiency," the subject line had promised. By the time I slipped into a seat near the back of the glass-walled conference room, most of the team had already assembled. Faces were tight with anticipation, others forced into neutral expressions. No coffee cups, no idle chatter, just silent glances and the occasional throat clear. People sat straighter now, as if slouching might get them noticed for the wrong reasons. Brandon Cross stood at the front, flanked by a projector and his 2 newest hires, young, polished, eager to impress. He clicked the remote and launched into his presentation, eyes shining with the kind of certainty only someone brand new could wear so comfortably. "We're entering a new phase," he said, his tone clipped, rehearsed, one focused on agility, strategic clarity, and most importantly, eliminating inefficiencies. He walked as he spoke, slow and theatrical, like a motivational speaker playing to an audience that hadn't bought tickets. Too many outdated processes. Too many people doing tasks that no longer serve our mission. We need to be lean, nimble, future-facing. The buzzwords came fast. Synergy, digital transformation, Gen Z-compatible workflows. A few heads nodded. Most stayed still. I kept my eyes on him, pen resting idle on my notepad. I'd heard the speech before. Different wording, different faces, same script. Then, mid-sentence, Brandon paused and looked directly at me. "You're Abigail, right?" There was a slight hesitation in his voice, like he was reaching for a name he hadn't bothered to learn, but suddenly realized he might need. "Yes," I said calmly. He smiled, more performance than warmth. "Remind me again what your role is, your translation." A few people shifted in their seats. Someone let out a breath too quickly. I didn't flinch. "I manage our communications and international partnerships," I said evenly. "Specifically, our East Asia accounts, contract negotiations, cultural alignment, and long-term client retention. I don't just translate words. I translate intent." Brandon blinked once, nodded like he understood. but I saw it, that glazed-over look. He wasn't really listening. Not to the words, not to the weight behind them. To him, I was still the language person, a relic of the old system, not someone worth remembering after 2 months on the job. Well, he said quickly, moving on, as I said, streamlining is the goal. And just like that, I was invisible again. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of metrics and vague promises. By the time we adjourned, 3 departments had been targeted for review. Everyone knew what that meant. As the room emptied, I gathered my things slowly, deliberately. I didn't rush. I didn't speak, but something inside me shifted. It wasn't the words that cut. It was the absence behind them. The way Brandon asked what I did like it was trivia. The way he filed me away in a box I didn't belong in. The way he smiled without seeing me. And I knew then, with unsettling clarity, he had no idea who I was or what I carried. But he would. The email arrived at 9:42 a.m. Subject line, meeting request. Brandon Cross. Time, 10:00 a.m. Location, conference room 3B. No agenda, no subject details. Just a sterile calendar block dropped into my morning without context. I didn't need one. Everyone knew what those meetings were about. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then closed the tab and let out a slow breath. I stood, smoothed the front of my navy blouse, and reached for my notebook. Not that I'd need it. The gesture was muscle memory, something to hold so my hands wouldn't betray what I felt. The hallway to 3B felt longer than usual. As I walked, I passed Jacob from legal, who quickly turned to study a vending machine he'd already used. Monica from creative looked up briefly, then busied herself with her phone like she hadn't seen me at all. The only person who met my eyes was Rachel, the accountant from down the hall. She gave me a quiet nod, the corners of her mouth twitching in apology. She knew. They all knew. Brandon and Camille were already in the room when I arrived. The blinds were drawn halfway, letting in the kind of gray morning light that made the city outside feel distant and irrelevant. Camille sat with a manila folder in front of her, hands folded neatly, posture stiff. Brandon stood by the whiteboard, pretending to study something he'd written, though I doubted it mattered. "Abigail," he said like he was greeting someone at a dinner party. "Thanks for joining us on short notice." He gestured toward the chair across from them. I sat, my back straight, palms resting flat on the table. Camille gave me a small smile. Professional, sympathetic, distant. Brandon moved to sit, adjusted his cuff, then opened the folder like it was some sacred document. "I want to start by saying how much we appreciate your years of service," he began. "You've been a valued part of the team." The words felt like they'd been pulled from a manual. He didn't even look at me when he said them. He continued, voice smooth, practiced. "As you know, we've been undergoing significant organizational review. As part of our initiative to streamline operations and realign strategic goals, we're consolidating some overlapping functions. With the new partnership we formed with Lingor International," he said, "we'll be centralizing language and cultural services externally. Your role, while incredibly valuable in the past, is no longer aligned with the direction we're heading." He nodded to Camille, who gently pushed the beige envelope across the table toward me. "This outlines your severance," she said softly. 2 months' pay, full medical for the same duration, and unused vacation days. Brandon leaned back, his voice softening slightly, as if he could cushion the impact by rounding his syllables. "This isn't personal, Abigail. It's evolution. We need to modernize." My eyes flicked to Camille. She had once invited me to her daughter's graduation dinner. Now she couldn't hold my gaze. "Are you certain," I said quietly, "that you understand what I actually do here?" Brandon's brows lifted just a touch, the way people do when they think they're being challenged but want to pretend otherwise. "You manage our East Asian client communications," he said, Translations. Cultural facilitation, I believe. I didn't correct him. I didn't need to. The ignorance had said enough. I folded my hands in front of me and rose slowly to my feet. Then I wish you good luck on Monday, I said, tone even. His brow creased. What's Monday? But I didn't answer. I turned and walked out, my heels clicking once, then again, swallowed by the soft hum of overhead lights and whispering HVAC vents. As I passed familiar desks, a few heads tilted up, then back down just as quickly. Nobody wanted to be associated with someone who no longer existed in the system. By the time I reached the elevator, someone had already updated the employee directory. My name was gone from the internal chat. In the lobby, Elaine, the security guard who had waved to me every morning for the past 7 years, stood up from her desk as I approached. I didn't know, she said quietly. I smiled gently. It's all right. She hesitated, then added, They're making a mistake. I said nothing, just stepped out through the revolving doors into the soft patter of spring rain. No umbrella. I welcomed the quiet, cold kiss of it on my skin. Let it seep into my blazer, my sleeves, my scalp. The city shimmered under gray clouds, and everything felt a little heavier, but clearer too. As I walked toward the parking garage, a single thought sat at the base of my chest, still and sharp. You don't need to be shouted at to feel dismissed. Sometimes silence does all the damage. But the story wouldn't end here. Not for me. Saturday came quietly, like it always did. No alarms, no pings from the team chat, no calendar reminders stacked like bricks on my phone. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that echoes. I stood in the doorway of my home office for a long time before walking in. The room hadn't changed. Same tidy bookshelves, same soft light filtering through the blinds. But something about it felt different, as if it knew, as if the space itself had been holding its breath all week, waiting for me to return and confirm the truth. This was no longer my remote workspace. Now it was just a room. I moved slowly, deliberately. I wasn't rushing to clean things out. Not like in the office where I had been erased before I could even unplug my laptop. Here, there was no one watching. I could take my time. On the top shelf was a ceramic crane hand-painted in cobalt blue, a gift from our Japanese partners at Aoyama Communications after we'd saved their multi-million-dollar campaign from collapsing due to a translation misfire. Next to it, a lacquered business card holder from Dejeuner Media in Seoul. I remembered how Mrs. Kim, their operations director, had slipped it into my palm at the airport gate with both hands and a quiet thank you in Korean. Each item I picked up carried a story, not just of deals and meetings, but of trust. Trust earned not through titles or speed or buzzwords, but through consistency, understanding, respect. I wrapped each piece in tissue paper and placed them gently into a small box. Not because I was moving on, but because I was honoring where I'd been. The day passed like that, quiet, focused. The kind of day that feels both long and short at the same time. Around 3:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number, Boston area code. For a moment, I let it ring. I wasn't in the mood for another vague recruiter pitch or an automated survey. Then it buzzed again. This time, a text. Hi, Abigail. This is Alex Meyer from Lawson & Reed. We met at the APAC Business Forum last year. I heard about what happened. Would love to talk if you're open. We've got a gap, and I think you're exactly what we need. I stared at the message, thumb hovering just above the reply button. Lawson & Reed, Boston-based consultancy, respectable, methodical, people first. They'd invited me to give a keynote last summer on navigating cross-cultural friction in high-stakes partnerships. Afterward, Alex had pulled me aside and said, "If you ever find yourself looking, give me a call." I hadn't thought he meant it. Most people didn't. But here he was. I didn't reply right away. I placed the phone face down and sat on the edge of my bed, letting the weight of the week catch up to me. Not to crush me, just to be acknowledged. I'd been cut off, dismissed, replaced by someone who'd never met Mr. Liang, never bowed before entering a meeting, never taken the time to understand the why behind a client's request. And yet, I wasn't broken. There's a strength in quiet survival, in not needing to prove anything to anyone. Later that evening, I responded to Alex with a short but clear message. "Thank you for reaching out. I'm available to talk Monday morning. Let me know what time's best." His reply came minutes later, 9:00 a.m. sharp. Looking forward to it. Monday morning arrived, cold and bright. I got dressed in a simple gray blazer and soft blue blouse. No armor, no edge, just me. As I fastened the last button, I looked at myself in the mirror. Not searching for flaws, not checking for power poses, just acknowledging the woman looking back. Not a victim, not a name crossed off an org chart, but a woman who knew her worth, who hadn't burned anything down, but who also hadn't let anyone silence her. I grabbed my portfolio and stepped out the door, not for revenge, not for validation, but to keep walking forward in the direction of my values. The 15th floor boardroom at Langston & Rowe had never looked more polished. Polished glass table, polished coffee trays, polished smiles. Brandon Cross stood at the head of the room, dressed in charcoal gray, wearing the same watch he'd flashed when he first introduced streamlining to the company. Behind him, a massive flat screen displayed the Langston & Rowe logo alongside the words Global Synergy, Next Gen Partnerships. The delegation from Din Media, one of the largest media groups in South Korea, had just arrived. 3 executives entered in quiet formation. Mr. Kang, Ms. Seo, and their legal advisor, Mr. Han, all poised, impeccably dressed, polite but distant. It was a critical morning. On the table sat a draft of a 3-year renewal contract worth over $22 million. A cornerstone agreement, the kind that anchors reputations and investor confidence, the kind Abigail had spent years nurturing call by call, meeting by meeting, always careful to balance corporate needs with cultural integrity. But Abigail wasn't in that room anymore. Brandon opened the meeting with all the energy of a tech startup founder. "First, let me just say how honored we are to continue our work with Degen. You've been one of our most valued partners, and we're excited about where we're heading together." He clicked through a few slides. Efficiency targets, projected ROI, internal performance restructuring. His voice bounced off the walls, confident, crisp. The Degen team listened politely. Too politely. Brandon kept talking, oblivious to the stiffness on the other side of the table. Every time he paused for emphasis, their eyes didn't light up. They narrowed. Mr. Han wrote something down. Miss Seo sipped slowly, not breaking eye contact. Then Mr. Kang raised his hand, quietly, calmly. "Excuse me, Mr. Cross," he said in flawless English. "May I ask, where's Miss Abigail Lane?" Brandon blinked, a beat too long. "Ah, Abigail. She's no longer with the company," he said, tone light, dismissive. "We've recently transitioned to a new international services framework. Very cutting edge. You'll be working with a rotating team now, supported by Lingur out of Singapore." Silence, dense and immediate. Mr. Kang glanced at Ms. Seo, who nodded ever so slightly. Then he looked back at Brandon. "I see," he said. But Abigail Lane was not just a translator. She understood our protocols. She understood our people. Brandon chuckled, the kind of laugh meant to mask discomfort. "Of course, and we absolutely appreciate her contributions. But you'll find our new structure just as capable, if not more flexible." Mr. Kang's lips pressed into a thin line. "There will be no renewal," he said flatly. Brandon blinked again. I'm sorry." Mr. Kang stood. "We no longer feel confident in the partnership. You've removed the only person who ever truly respected the relationship, not just the transaction." Ms. Seo rose next. Mr. Han collected his papers with precision. Brandon stammered. "I assure you this is a misunderstanding." "It is not," Mr. Han said, already heading for the door. "It is clarity. 10 minutes. That's how long it took for the room to go from poised victory to unraveling disaster." As the door closed behind the delegation, Brandon stood frozen, lips slightly parted, like a man watching his reflection crack down the middle. Across the city, in the sunlit offices of Lawson and Reed, I sat with a cup of coffee in hand. Alex Meyer had just stepped out to prepare the client dossier for my onboarding. The desk they gave me was temporary, but the view was permanent. Boston skyline layered behind framed glass, morning sun cutting across the floor like a spotlight. I hadn't needed to check the time. I knew Dejan's meeting with Langston and Rowe was at 10 a.m., and I knew exactly how it would go. At 10:13, my phone buzzed. A message from a former colleague, someone who hadn't spoken to me since I'd been let go. All it said was, "They just walked out. Din looks like he's been slapped with a brick." I took another sip of my coffee. Didn't smile. Not really. But something in my chest, something deep and quiet, exhaled. Not vengeance, not pride. Justice. Subtle, precise, inevitable. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't even need to speak. Because truth doesn't need a microphone. It just needs time. It started with the Dejan fallout. Then it began to spread. At first, it looked like a ripple, a minor delay from a Tokyo-based firm citing internal reassessments, a polite reschedule request from a Singapore media group just to revisit the terms. Brandon brushed them off as routine. "Nothing unusual in a shifting market," he told the executive team. "We'll realign. Clients just need reassurance." But reassurance didn't come. Instead, by the end of the week, a French tech conglomerate paused its contract renewal process. A longtime German publishing client suddenly asked to renegotiate its delivery timelines. A Canadian partner who had never missed a quarterly sync-up failed to show and didn't respond to Brandon's follow-up email until 3 days later with a cold, single-line reply. "We're watching how you handle transitions." Inside Langston and Rowe, panic didn't show up loudly. It crept in through the seams. People spoke softer. Meetings ran longer, with more finger-pointing and fewer decisions. Even the bright-eyed hires Brandon had once paraded around like trophies now sat with tense shoulders and darting glances. Brandon, meanwhile, kept spinning. He blamed the agency in Singapore, LingoCore. "They're failing to localize messaging effectively," he said in a leadership call, his voice just a little too tight. "We may need to consider an alternate vendor." Camille from HR, once always at his side, said nothing. She had bags under her eyes now. The kind that come from watching things fall apart from behind a glass door you can't open. But no matter how Brandon pivoted, one name kept surfacing in the background noise. Abigail. In internal whispers, in client calls, in emails that started with, "We were surprised to hear she's no longer with you." There was no smear campaign, no loud denouncement, just quiet absence, the kind that echoes louder than presence when trust is gone. Brandon tried to counter it with forced enthusiasm. "We're evolving," he said during one Friday town hall. "Change is growth. This is just the market testing our resilience." But no one was buying it, especially not the clients. Meanwhile, across the city, I worked quietly in a sunlit office, coffee in hand, headset in place. I wasn't looking back. Not really, but I was paying attention. My inbox at Lawson and Reed had begun to fill, not just with new contacts, but with old ones, partners from my past life checking in casually or not so casually. One message from Mr. Liang read, "We've heard where you've landed. We're very pleased. Let's talk soon." Another came from a contact in Osaka I hadn't spoken to in over a year. "Is it true you've moved firms? We're unhappy with how things are being handled. Would love to reconnect." I didn't initiate these messages. I didn't have to. Trust, once earned deeply, doesn't vanish overnight. It waits quietly, and when the time is right, it returns home. At Lawson and Reed, I wasn't just answering emails. I was rebuilding a bridge network, brick by brick. Not for revenge, but for renewal. Back at Langston and Rowe, Brandon's world continued to shrink. One morning, a senior client from Indonesia canceled a video call with 2 minutes' notice. Another declined to attend the quarterly review presentation altogether, sending a junior rep in their place with a single instruction: observe only, do not speak. By the third week, the marketing team was instructed to temporarily pause all outbound international campaigns. Budgets were under review, and the once slick agency reels Brandon had loved to show off were suddenly absent from the Monday meetings. Behind closed doors, he raged, blamed poor handoffs, accused staff of clinging to outdated loyalties. But outside those rooms, the truth had already rooted itself. Abigail was gone, and with her, the company's credibility. People didn't trust Langston and Rowe anymore. Not without someone who understood nuance, who remembered names, who bowed when appropriate, who didn't treat a deal like a transaction, but like a living relationship. I wasn't out to burn anything down. I didn't have to. They were doing it to themselves, and all I had to do was keep walking forward, one conversation at a time, one reconnected handshake at a time, until the map of influence Brandon thought he controlled quietly redrew itself and placed me at the center. I didn't need revenge. I had something far better: control. The most satisfying victories are the ones no one sees coming. I didn't make any public announcements. I didn't post about my comeback on LinkedIn. I didn't even tell most people I was back in the building. But every day, quietly, another piece slid into place. At Lawson and Reed, my new desk faced the window. Sunlight poured in around 9:30 a.m., the same time I usually began my calls. Not loud sales pitches, just conversations. Conversations built on years of shared projects, remembered names, quiet respect. "Abigail," they'd say sometimes, surprised, always warm. "We've missed working with you." I didn't need to pitch them anything. I just listened, gave honest updates, shared what we were doing at Lawson and Reed, how we were operating differently, how we were doing it better. Not flashier, just better. And one by one, they came. Not with press releases or champagne toasts, just quiet transfers of trust. One week, it was the European content group that used to anchor Langston and Rose's EMEA presence. The next, a South American creative agency that had stopped returning Brandon's calls. Then a longtime East Asian logistics client who asked if I could review their new terms personally. Not through an assistant, not through a rep, through me. None of these moves made headlines, but they made an impact. Inside Langston and Rowe, the cracks were widening. I knew because word began to leak from people still trapped inside. Messages from employees who had once looked right through me now landing softly in my inbox. The Singapore agency just lost another account. Brandon keeps blaming market instability. Camille's team is down to 4 people. They're exhausted. I didn't reply to most of them. I didn't need to. While Brandon spun in circles trying to hold the empire together, I was calmly building something stronger out of nothing but credibility, timing, and consistency. At Lawson and Reed, my new colleagues started to notice. Not with fanfare, just nods. Doors held open longer, voices lowered when I entered a room. Alex Meyer started pulling me into more strategic briefings, not because I asked, but because I'd earned it without saying a word. And all the while, I stayed quiet. I didn't badmouth Brandon. I didn't take credit. I didn't gloat. That was the beauty of it. He had handed me the perfect setup. In trying to erase me, he revealed how essential I'd been. Now he was paying for it. Contract by contract, call by call, silence by silence. And I was just doing what I'd always done. My work. But this time, on my terms. There was one moment that stayed with me. A Tuesday afternoon, walking out of a discreet meeting in a private suite at the Langford Hotel. I had just introduced Alex to 2 international partners I used to manage. They shook hands quietly. No cameras, no signatures yet, but I knew it was done. As we walked back to the curb, Alex looked at me and said, "I don't know how you do it, but they trust you instantly." I smiled. Not wide, just enough. "They don't trust me instantly," I said. "They trust what never changed." He nodded, but said nothing else. We stood there for a moment, the city buzzing just beyond the sidewalk. Horns, footsteps, motion everywhere. But inside me, stillness, satisfaction that didn't need a spotlight, peace that didn't need permission. I wasn't fighting anymore. I was winning, quietly, completely. I asked to meet him, not through his assistant, not through some layered calendar negotiation. Just one email, short, direct, unmistakable. "Brandon, I'd like to speak with you. One-on-one, no pretense. Friday, 9:00 a.m. Conference room 5. I'll be there either way. Abigail Lane." When I walked into the room, he was already seated. For the first time in months, he didn't stand to greet me, didn't smile, didn't perform. He just sat there, elbows on the table, a legal pad in front of him that was still blank. His pen wasn't moving. Good. He finally understood this wasn't a negotiation. I sat down across from him. The silence stretched. I let it. He looked like a man who'd stopped sleeping, pale, slightly hunched. The usual arrogance drained from his shoulders like blood from a cracked vase. I didn't enjoy it, but I also didn't feel sorry for him. "I assume this is about the Seoul account," he said first, voice thin. "Or maybe Tokyo or Paris." I shook my head once. "No," I said. "This is about all of it." He blinked. "You called me a consultant?" I continued. "You thought you were being clever, bringing me in without titles, without credit. But you made one critical mistake." I leaned forward, not to intimidate, but to make sure he heard me, every word. "You underestimated the one thing you can't buy, the one thing you can't outsource. Trust." He swallowed, but said nothing. "You thought it was just about language, just about contracts and etiquette. But what I gave those partners, what they gave me in return, wasn't transactional. It was earned." I pulled a simple folder from my bag and laid it on the table. Inside were names, dates, and transfer confirmations. Every client who had walked, every account that had quietly moved to Lawson and Reed. "They didn't leave because I asked them to," I said. "They left because of you." His mouth opened, then closed again. I watched it happen, the flicker of realization behind his eyes, the slow, choking unraveling of his story. "You fired me," I said, "not because I was incompetent, but because I didn't fit into your spreadsheet, because I made you feel replaceable." I stood, gathering my bag, calm as ever. "I didn't come back to fix this," I said. Brandon looked up, desperate now. "Then why?" I paused in the doorway, hand resting lightly on the frame. "I came back so you'd know exactly who removed every nail from the throne you built out of vanity." And I left. No threats, no slamming doors, no raised voice. Justice doesn't need theatrics, just truth. Outside, the morning light broke across the skyline like a quiet promise. I stepped into it with no badge, no title, no lingering weight, and yet I'd never stood taller. Langston and Rowe didn't crash all at once. It unraveled quietly, painfully, and very publicly. A whistleblower emerged. Then, too, the press caught wind of the internal exodus, the botched international transitions, the collapse of trust in key markets. Headlines followed like falling dominoes. Global clients pull out of Langston and Rowe amid scandal. CEO Brandon Cross resigns. After series of high-profile losses, former partners allege gross mismanagement, lack of cultural competence. Investors panicked. Board members quit. The stock tumbled, then flatlined. It didn't take long. By the end of the quarter, Langston and Rowe was no longer a name whispered with respect in global circles. It was a cautionary tale about ego, about oversight, about what happens when you confuse efficiency with integrity. And me? I was at peace. I sat by the window in my new office at Lawson & Reed, a cup of jasmine tea in hand, morning light pouring across my desk. The air was still. No phones ringing off the hook, no urgent Slack messages. Just quiet focus and a view of the skyline I never used to stop and appreciate. My calendar was full, but not frantic. Strategy meetings with people who listened, partnership reviews with teams who asked thoughtful questions, clients who respected the process because I respected them first. This wasn't a rebound, it was a reset. The door behind me clicked once, a soft delivery of mail. I barely turned, just reached over, set the envelope aside, and took another sip of tea. Then my phone buzzed. A name I hadn't seen in months lit up the screen. A former colleague from Langston and Rowe, one of the quiet ones, the ones who had watched it all happen and said nothing, not out of malice, but fear. The message was short. I should have stood with you sooner. I see that now. I'm sorry. I stared at it for a moment, not with anger, not even with pity, just stillness. I didn't reply. Some messages aren't meant to be answered. Some realizations don't need my validation. I set the phone down and returned to the moment, to the warmth of the tea, the soft hum of life outside the window, and the quiet knowledge that justice had already spoken. Not loudly, not with revenge, but with consequence. And I didn't have to lift a finger to force it. Because sometimes peace doesn't come from striking back. It comes from knowing you were right all along and letting the fire burn itself out. Lesson learned. The true value of an individual cannot be measured solely by numbers or titles. Trust, a deep understanding of culture, and the ability to build lasting relationships are invaluable assets that technology or efficiency alone cannot replace. This story also conveys the message that arrogance and disrespect can lead to severe consequences, while patience, integrity, and the quiet ability to assert one's self-worth will ultimately lead to genuine victory. Sometimes your absence can speak volumes more than any words.